What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. The support role has been a focal point for the Overwatch devs because in the big transition to 5v5, their attention was clearly spent elsewhere first. But it's been months now. What has Blizzard tried, and did it work to fix the role? Low-key, one of the biggest buffs to the role was a nerf to the DPS passive at the start of Season 2. The extra move speed went away, and that dramatically switched up the category's power. Slower, range DPS gained favor, and flankers got worse. So now, instead of dying to flanks like in Season 1, there's loads of annoying one-shots that are meta instead. Pick your poison, I suppose. The devs have also been gradually buffing the role over time. Their passive, self-regen, kicks in significantly faster than it did way back in the alpha tests. Zen got a kick, BAP got an insane regen buff, Mercy players got loads of movement control, and recently Ana got a 3-shot kill on squishies. Moira and Brig got small hotfixes recently, but all of the supports have been gradually moving up in power. But to me, I dislike the support role quite a lot more now than I did in Season 1. How can that be? Well, communication from the devs have made it clear that support is one of their biggest focuses. Big words. But the changes have more slowly crept up over time instead of anything too radical, so it's hard to notice a big change from months ago. And although I do altogether think the role has improved, it's just that the meta has gone off the rails. Specifically, how burst damage has gained an outmoded amount of power. Burst damage and snipes is a problem that affects all roles negatively, in my opinion, but the truth is, support is a bit of a victim of its own design. Because Kiriko is the most survivable and has insane clutch pocketing and counters Ana, as well as other status effects, and in herself is a low sustained damage but big burst damage threat, the support category sort of gets relegated to play the burst impact game. Characters that try to fight in the open for too long are just asking for death, so you might as well fully hide like Mercy, holding onto a blue beam, or dedicate to the movement and pickoffs with Kiriko. Mirror metas are really interesting to me, how they evolve, or maybe in this case, devolve in Overwatch. In a team fight where both teams have Kiriko, both can escape easily, but just as well, both heal a lot, but pressure very little, and can get burst limbs. Most commentators and analysts tend to blame everything else in the game right now, and I'd partially agree on Sojourn, Hog, etc., but despite my love of Kiriko's gameplay personally, the effect on the game is that it pushes us towards the burst meta we have, because there just isn't another gap in her game. Two Kirikos can't really leverage a big gap on the front line, so it requires the tank to have super high damage like Roadhog, as they both get bailed out by their Kirikos respectively. Otherwise, just sort of nothing dies. And when you compare that to an Ana mirror meta, both can boost up their tank, yes, but they both can disable the enemies. This gives a lot of power to the support player to maximize that offensive threat, and requires you to take the initiative a lot of the time. Whereas in Kiriko mirrors, especially with how they rebalanced her to take value away from her heal botting and ultimate, even her being as good as she is, it's going to be a bit hard to win the game with just healing like you could in Season 1. Now you have to hit kunais, because that's how they rebalance the character. Now I am interested in finding out what's going to happen with the upcoming balance patch in mid-January or late January. There's other OP heroes that everyone's worried about, but I think the one that nobody talks about is Kiriko's healing power, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be addressed. It's too much health, too easy to hit. That's how I feel about it, which means you're able to pocket up a character and save them from the brink of death. To slow that part of the game down, the teamwork part, where their team shooting your ally, well, you can just burst them up and then get back to only expecting headshots to be the reason someone falls. If you can't pressure and win, well, then you gotta snipe. That's just the logic of the game. And I will admit, it might seem like a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, which causes what? And I'm not just upset at the meta state. There's a broader fun factor appeal to the role that Blizzard has been apparently trying to fix. For me, it's been worse in Season 2. But on a bit of a brighter note, one last alteration that came in Season 2 was the addition of Ramattra, who I won't let be forgotten in the sands of time of hero releases. Talk about Ramattra seems to have been muted since release because he just wasn't broken enough to be too interesting. But I think we should praise Ramattra as perhaps being the most balanced and healthy addition to Overwatch ever. He's a finesse hero that is competitive, but not overpowered, really. Just has some overpowered parts of his kit like any character. And I do want to warn that perhaps if the burst damage of the game goes down, Ram's attritional value might be oppressive, but look out for that next season, folks. It's not like anybody else is trying to think more than a day ahead of us, but you start nerfing the hog and the snipers, pocketing Ram, I think, is the thing that's going to creep up. But overall, for support gameplay, I take his addition as quite a big win, because Ramattra is the closest thing we have to a traditional viable main tank in Overwatch 2. The rest of the tanks have been reconstructed to play more towards aggressive, thick damage hero and protect less or not at all. Ramattra is really the only viable version of that, which helps the support gameplay feel, in my opinion, because against one, his damage doesn't just burst you down instantly. Dying to him requires a series of mistakes, then just, haha, Roadhog exists. But also with Ram's really big health pool, there's a lot of healing to do. Whereas an area you can then begin to leverage a support gap because there's support gameplay viable in the game. But in a world where Roadhog heals himself anyway, and everyone's playing for snipes, we kind of forgot what that's like, I feel. The support role also suffers from a few more things. One, there's just not enough options. The other roles are spoiled for choice, and while Kiriko is a huge power boost to the role in theory, you might say she's the only real significant gameplay update for the role to update it for Overwatch 2 to match the tank reworks in 5v5. But the bigger problem is that she counters Ana. That might be one of the best things she does, which has this odd neutralizing effect on the metagame that makes the roster feel even more cramped and limited than it might otherwise feel like. There's a few more issues I have. I'm going to keep saying it because it continues to be true, but the support passive is a huge mistake. Because actualizing the support passive requires good cover usage, almost to the level of playing attack shooter, it makes the role not only more difficult to access, but less fun. Because you want to know how to maximize a support passive, guys? Well, there's two ways. One, stare at a wall safely so you don't get hit and you heal yourself, which might be a strong tactic in Overwatch 2, but not as fun as the other option, or the other roles for that matter. And this is an oversight I've been trying to mention since beta, but the supports that are already survivable based on their movement or escapes are more likely to be able to go in, get hurt, and actually escape to use the support passive. So heroes that would probably be good in Overwatch 2 anyway, just based on their mobility, like Lucio, Moira, and especially Kiriko, who you probably even forget doesn't have her own self-heal. Remember when that was such an important thing to have on the support characters? They all had them in Overwatch 1. Does that even matter for Kiriko since everyone gets the support passive? I don't think this is having the results Blizzard intended, because while they originally sold us on the idea to be able to uniformly buff one of the roles to help it out, what really ends up happening is that just specific heroes inside the role change their power level based on how the whole game changes around the role passive, disproportionately boosting some heroes over others. The important takeaway for me is that Kiriko's uptime would be significantly less if all supports lost the passive, if they nerfed the entire role, removing the passive. I'm not actually suggesting this, but just as a thought experiment, it would in many ways make the role play better. Because I know what they thought about in theory as Zen or Ana, these slow characters you set up on some cover, you take a little bit of poke, you hide away, but that doesn't happen and it's not actually that useful. Well, first of all, there's health packs all around the map anyway, but really the thing those characters struggle with is traversing the map and getting into position to begin with. And the bigger benefactors, Lucio, Moira, Kiriko, they have their uptime significantly ramped up. So they get to go in, little mini soft reset around a corner quickly, heal, and go in again faster than they otherwise would. It's the same thing as the DPS move speed passive being a problem for slower supports, in the same way that self-heal passive is still, in my opinion, benefiting the wrong heroes. You might even say, okay, Mercy got the short end of the stick with that, but if you're in the type of meta where you're supposed to hide around a corner, well, why not hide around a corner and damage boost your sniper instead of try to go play support, right? So rather than think about the imagined power level, I'm talking about the practical effect of how you're going to have to play the game based on the rules and the passive as it exists. To me, the passive was a failed experiment and has the opposite of the desired impact. While in theory, it feels great to not have to use Ana's nade to self-heal anymore, the truth is if you're applying range range pressure, expecting to hide around a corner and self-heal and do it again. It's just not how the meta's playing anyway. Doing that would get you sniped or picked off by Roadhog. Regardless, squishies in general need to jump out of cover and back in. And what the passive has done is just sped up the rate that the supports that already do that, like Kiriko, Lucio, or Mercy and Moira, to give them more uptime than they probably even need. They try to address that specifically when they tuned Lucio while buffing the role, because Lucio was the God King support for the longest time for exactly this reason. But I'm unsure why they haven't figured out why it's having the results it's still having. The reasons why they needed to nerf Lucio self-heal like they did, I don't know, like in the first month, I forget at this point, was for the same uptime problem. I don't necessarily have the surefire solution that's going to save this passive problem, but I think a good analog to get us thinking in the right direction is looking to the DPS passive. Removing the move speed boost to in place a uniform reload buff, which is kind of an irrelevant passive for a lot of characters, but it meant that slower DPS and specifically low capacity ones saw the biggest benefit of what otherwise is kind of weak of a passive effect. But that's fine to me, because I think passives are overrated anyway. They haven't helped the game the way we imagined they might. Because, like, imagine if the main tank style tanks were the ones that had the knockback resist, as opposed to all of them uniformly. Would we feel different about a character like Roadhog then? Because when all the tanks have a lot of the same properties that make them tanky, they all kind of just get to play the same thing, and we uniformly fall into whichever one has the best stats for the given meta. It actually removes a significant amount of individuality from the tank roles, where they can make up whatever rules they want. This idea that each role needs its own passive so they all do a similar thing is not a good idea. I'd prefer those passive ideas be split towards subsets of the role. Like maybe the main tanks have knockback resist, and maybe the non-mobility supports have their own passive, or they're the ones who have the self-regen, because I don't think it breaks the game when they have it. Like, I know Overwatch 2 is becoming a very complicated game with a lot of things to learn, and they keep making abilities more specific on how the interactions are, and you gotta learn more and more stuff about what the characters even do or how they interact, but so what? That's the game we have now. The hero roster just keeps getting bigger. That's gotta happen, I feel, right? The complexity creep is already here. So I don't see the benefit of the uniform passive, because all the uniform passive does anyway is still do the same effect of what I just said. It still benefits some heroes instead of others, just for the wrong reasons, in my opinion, like almost on accident, as opposed to them selecting which characters do that specific concept or mechanic. How is this for a support passive, just for the ones that don't have mobility? What if out of combat for a certain amount of time, they get a speed boost just before they like see an enemy or something? Because for me, the most annoying part of playing support is repositioning between fights to get into the cover spots that you're supposed to use to activate the support passive and do your job. Also, the slower characters in particular are super obnoxious to play when your teammates are staggering. Because whereas the other two roles can kind of just go get their own eliminations a lot of the time, the support role, in concept anyway, gets value from giving things to their team, which requires their team to be in a good position to receive it and not have already thrown the fight by going in too early or playing in bad ground. But since those things do happen, trying to climb out of that hole as a support is the most obnoxious part about the role to me. The biggest ways I feel I take L's that I barely can contribute to is when the team takes a bad flank or regroups poorly, which sucks because for me, support is my favorite role because it's the one that has the most weight in game sense and ability interactions over just pure aim, or at least, you know, in theory. In practice, in this burst meta, I feel your biggest assets right now are just running from death, and really, if you want to rank up, you need your own burst eliminations to eliminate the enemy for your team. Reason being, the matchups in the game are so severe, this meta is bad to try to heal your way to victory. In fact, they've tried to remove that where possible, nerfing down Kiriko's heal bot for her ultimate playstyle, and instead telling you, get in there and kunai more. And when the tanks are tankier, you have more chance to heal gap, but that's tough with so many one one-shot characters lurking. Personally, for me, my favorite matchups, still 6+ years later, is supporting a main tank like Winston or Reinhardt, both of which not very good right now, which has the ripple effect of snipers being better and support not really feeling like it gets to support much. Well, at least we might have Ramattra meta for season 3, so let's look out for that. But moving on, what can the developers do? What will they do? They talked a big game towards the support role, but it's kind of been a fizzle, to be honest, and for me, worse, based on the context anyway. We know what they won't do. They're not going to add uniform, more damage pressure across the board. We've already got Kiriko for the snipes, and it was out of place and against that stated philosophy to buff up Ana's damage, but I don't think more of that's going to happen. I'm interested to see what happens with the mid-season or end of month patch we're getting here, where Hog will be nerfed. But truthfully, for me, that problem has existed so long, enough players have learned to pick Orisa versus Hog that he's not even the biggest threat to me anymore. And I was trying to warn about this way long ago, but it seems like players have figured it out, that it's not just Sojourn that's the one-shot DPS causing trouble. Also, Widowmaker and, yeah, of course, Junkrat can pop out and insta-wreck you too. And with all that being stated, that's why it makes sense that the role's been kind of relegated to a state I think is actually just worse, needing to either play flanker kunai warrior with Kiriko or hide and go seek with Mercy. It's funny to me how the unforeseen consequences add up over time, because on paper, with how many things they nerfed about Sojourn, you'd think maybe she'd be dumpstered, but even after losing the slow on her nade and lots of other things, because Mercy reverts the breakpoint nerf, and they significantly buffed her ultimate, we're still somehow dealing with Sojourn being super oppressive all the way into Season 2. Oh yeah, and she's easier than before. Thanks for that, Blizzard. Can you believe that? How could Blizzard possibly want to make Sojourn more accessible to more players? What a silly direction to go. Why would you do this, Blizzard? I can see Soldier being accessible, but he already is. We don't need Widowmaker and Sojourn to be accessible. It's okay if only a few percentage points of the entire player base are really good at these picks. I don't know why they were insistent on making Sojourn's ultimate really good, because it's not like Widowmaker's ult does much if you miss either. She doesn't shoot twice as fast to compensate just so you can body shot your way to victory. That buff's just gotta go. I'm sick of body shot bandit Sojourn players, is also making this even harder for supports, I feel. When trying to reassess from Season 1, at least for me personally, Season 2 is actually worse overall from the support point of view. Not because the patch notes specifically, or that they haven't tried to toss enough token buffs, but of what the meta became and why. I'm curious what other players think. I don't know if this will come off as a controversial video or not. To me, this seems pretty obvious, but it might take some layers of understanding, because I literally was describing a lot of support nerfs that need to happen in order for the playability of the role to open up, but along with other nerfs to the other roles, of course. See, here's the thing. In Season 1, with the DPS passive being oppressive, speed boosting Genji or Reaper into your face, to me, that still felt like hero shooter mechanics. I could outplay that in a number of ways. Whereas playing support and getting sniped from a Mercy pocketed Sojourn, Widowmaker, or hooked by Hog, that just robs the support role from a job. Either DPS back, like Kiriko, or hide on a corner with Mercy. That's what the role is right now. And to me, that's just worse than Season 1 even, somehow, even though less people are talking about it. And just to be clear, I don't dislike Mercy as a character, but I just don't even think Mercy players really enjoy pocketing a sniper, fully hiding from the combat. That's not good gameplay, okay? Mercy is fun as a hero when you get value from moving and dodging well. I haven't even mastered the new move text yet, but I barely need to, since most of the gameplay requires me to hide on a corner while my DPS play Valorant anyway. That's not cool. And while looking to the future, I'm a bit optimistic, because I do think Roadhog being nerfed, or probably reworked as they seem to be describing it, like if it was just straight nerfed, you would think that would come in a hot fix. I think they're making him more tanky, so Kiriko existing in the roster doesn't break his gameplay interactions. And if Hog's not as good, we might be able to actually play Winston again. And for me, that's ultimately what matters most. Everyone always gets so tangled up in the actual numbers of things, but most of the patches I talked about today, other than Ana's 3-shot, have very little to the actual interactions of what's going on in the game. And some unintuitive results, like trying to get Kiriko to be less of a heal bot, surprisingly pushes us towards more one-shots. Yeah, it does the effect that they wanted, incentivizing a meta where she attacks more than she did before, but that makes tanking much worse, because then it just makes Hog better. And my last point for the video, an interesting idea that's a bit of a problem for Overwatch 2 and the support role in general, is that, for me anyway, the more interesting tanks to enable good support gameplay are the ones that don't have their own cooldowns to turn them into Overwatch 2 kaiju monsters. Okay, so Winston and Reinhardt need healing to keep them in their armor health to be good characters, but there's not really a reason to get them in the meta right now. They're just weak characters and weak playstyles. While in Overwatch 1, it may have felt that the entire main tank position was made or broken by where your support utility went, and if they missed, you had a bad time. So because of that, they gave all manner of cooldowns onto the tank to buy yourself time while your supports found the reins, so to speak, and landed some abilities on you to get you back up. I think that was the theory, but what happened in effect was then you just don't even really need to support your tank a lot of the time, and you should just play with your damage instead, because your tank's going to go in and get out by himself. Orisa and Hog's cooldowns especially are like that to me. And the more the gameplay works that way, the more you're going to want to support your DPS or to DPS yourself, which results us in the meta that we have. And in my opinion, it's not very good. Optimistic for the future and interested to read what you guys have to say. Is the support role better or worse from season 1? Do you like dying to Genji and Reaper or Widowmaker and Sojourn? You can also say they're both equally bad. That's also an option. If you enjoyed this video though, please be sure to leave it a like and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. Clicking the bell icon will get you notifications sent directly to your cell phone when our new videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.